Most people who become interested in homosexuality as a subject do so because they were forced to. Homosexuality is not about sex. Gay apologists would have us believe that it's only sexual orientation, that the person is normal and natural in every way except for his sexual choice. And we find it to be completely the opposite. The boy is going to experience a narcissistic hurt, a shame for his masculine strivings. Right there, that's the foundation of homosexuality. A shame for his masculine strivings. Most people who become interested in homosexuality as a subject do so because they were forced to. Most people really would rather not even think about homosexuality unless something is happening in their life. Either they're counselors or professionals, or a loved one is dealing with this problem, or they're dealing with the problem themselves. Otherwise, people would really rather not think about it. But what I want to do is present a developmental model. This is not about blame or making people feel bad. I know that many parents will be watching this video or even listening to this. So it's not about blame or guilt. It's really to educate. So I'm going to present a model to you that we have found repeatedly at our clinic, a developmental model and a treatable program that seems to work for the clients that we work with. You decide if it's relevant to your life, if you think it fits someone you know. But what we do have, what we will be presenting here is scientifically based. There's a lot of scientific and empirical evidence to support this presentation. So to begin with, homosexuality is not a sexual problem, it's a gender identity problem. Homosexuality is not about sex. Gay apologists would have us believe that it's only sexual orientation, that the person is normal and natural in every way except for his sexual choice. And we find it to be completely the opposite. Homosexuality is about self-esteem. It's about one's sense of oneself, about his relationships, his past hurts. Homosexuality is about childhood wounds, self-image, personal shame, and his belief in his ability to establish and sustain relational intimacy. Homosexual behavior is always, my wife says, when you speak publicly, never speak in absolutes. I'm saying homosexuality is always prompted by an inner sense of loneliness and emptiness. And that's what the focus is of the therapy. The focus is not on the sexual behavior, it's on the preceding feeling about oneself before he has the impulse to act out. One client who's been working with me for about 2 years, and I've been really pushing this point that it's really not about homosexuality. Finally, after 2 years, he finally got it. He's a physician with 3 kids, by the way. And he said to me, I finally figured it out. The good news is I don't have a sexual problem. The bad news is that I have a problem with everything else. But he's right. The everything else is about oneself. We have 4 gay myths that are being promoted in our culture. Number 1, 10% of the population is homosexual. Don't believe it. That was promoted by Kinsey in the 1950s and has been repeated as a lie for over 50, 60 years now. Kinsey himself was a homosexual. In fact, he was a masochistic homosexual, and in a recent biography talked about how he got sexual pleasure from receiving pain. This was the great expert in the 1950s teaching America about the sexuality. Number 2, you're born gay. That's a myth that's being promoted. Once gay, always gay. Once gay, always gay. Luckily, we're hearing more and more testimonies from men and women who are willing to come forth and tell their stories, because we need faces. I can stand up here and all the other scientific experts can stand up, but you need faces, you need stories to convince people that change is possible. Number 4, homosexuality is normal in every way. That's the other mythology that's being promoted. Gay characters on television, in the media, are always the normal, well-adjusted. The gay man is preppy looking, wholesome, happy, good-looking, hip, at peace with himself. It's usually the heterosexual guy who has the insecurities about his sexuality. If you can believe 1, 2, 3, and 4, then the conclusion is total acceptance. And that's exactly what the gay agenda is promoting, total acceptance. But we make the distinction between tolerance and approval. And we're living in an age of sound bites, and people get confused. But we're making the distinction between tolerance versus approval. In other words, we are tolerant of people. People have a right to pursue their life, pursue happiness how they want. But it does not mean that we have to give approval. We can withhold approval. And we make the distinction, well, let's go back. Informed disapproval does not mean homophobia. So we can hold a position of disapproval, which is informed, it's educated. And we get our education from seminars like this today, from our reading, from our education, from talking to people, including our own religious traditions. Our own religious traditions give us insight and understanding that we can certainly bring into an argument. We don't have to feel that our religion has nothing to do with our development of our views of homosexuality. I always make the distinction between gay versus homosexual, and it's very important to make that distinction. People want to use the term synonymously, and gay activists would want us to use homosexual and gay as synonymous, but we make the distinction. Gay is a social political identity. It's basically saying, this is who I am, it's normal and natural for me. Homosexuality, on the other hand, is a simple description of a sexual preference. It's a psychological condition. Our clients are dealing with homosexuality, but they are not gay identified. Now that I've made that distinction, I want to complicate it with this statement: there is no such thing as a homosexual. There is no such thing as a homosexual. I remember a father calling me up a while back. He said, our 15-year-old son just announced that he is a homosexual, and we're looking for a psychologist that we can really trust, who can tell us, is he homosexual or not? I said, he's not. They said, how do you know? You haven't seen him yet. I said, I know, because he is a hetero. His body was designed for the opposite sex. And it's amazing how many people really believe that, even if you're religious people, believe that God created two kinds of people, homosexuals and heterosexuals. How many leaders of our church actually believe that? If you believe that, you throw the natural law on its head. And the theology of the body is completely out the window. Homosexuality is a gender identity disorder. And this is the point that we say repeatedly, that homosexuality is in most cases a gender identity disorder. There were two gay men standing on the street corner, and a beautiful woman walks by, and one gay man says to the other, it's moments like this that I wish I was a lesbian. You see, because he's confused. It's a gender identity confusion. Little humor. So homosexuality is not about sex, it's about the sense of oneself. And homosexuality is a masculine inferiority. And through sex, he hopes to make that compensation for his own inferiority. What I'd like to do is present a developmental model of this homosexual condition. And now some of the researchers may disagree with this, but this is the pattern that we see repeatedly at our clinic. So again, look at this, evaluate it, you decide if you think this fits your life or someone you know. So we're talking about, to begin with, the gender identity phase. We're talking about 1.5 to 3 years old. The gender identity phase is a very important phase when the boy, now we'll be talking about male psychology. Female psychology, as all things feminine, are more complicated, often contradictory. So we'll keep with the simple male developmental model. So we'll talk about 1.5 to 3 years old. That's when the boy needs to disidentify with the mother and bond with the father. Now the girl has it easier because her gender identity is with the mother. She doesn't have to go through this additional developmental phase. And that might explain why there is more male homosexuality than lesbianism, because it's harder to be a male. Robert Stoller from UCLA said, masculinity is an achievement. And that goes back to what was said earlier with David. We need the boy needs the support of the family and the culture to acquire the sense of masculinity. But for the girl, it's easier because she maintains her primary identification with the mother. So we go through the androgynous phase. The androgynous phase is pre-gender identity. That's when the boy feels himself to be androgynous. The world is just divided between male and female. He begins to see that you have male, you have female. He never noticed this before. Language is coming in during this period of time. His, her, he, she. Language forces a distinction between the genders. Pink, blue, this is all cultural push. But he is typically holding on to the androgynous fantasy. The androgynous fantasy is, I can be both male and female. The world is pushing me out there, but I'm special. That is a natural narcissism, a narcissism appropriate to infancy, not appropriate to adulthood. So he's holding on to that. But the biological is pushing him. He's biologically driven to fulfill his masculine ambition. And at this time, he needs to disidentify from the mother, pull away from her, notice the difference between him and her, and begin to make that identification with the father. And that's the normal process. Now, if the boy has a father who's not interested in him, the father doesn't care about him, the boy is reaching out to dad, wants to make the bonding, but the father is non-receptive, or if the mother is pulling him back and sabotaging his separation individuation, the boy is going to experience a narcissistic hurt, a shame for his masculine strivings. Right there, that's the foundation of homosexuality. A shame for his masculine strivings. Somewhere along the line, he has learned the lesson, you can't be male. You are not invited into the world of men. It's out there, it's beyond your reach. And for the rest of his life, he's going through anticipating shame. And that's what homosexuality is, an anticipation of shame. And he lives in the shame posture. This is something I observed when I started doing this work many, many years ago, before I understood what homosexuality was. The client would walk in a self-protected posture. He was timid, he was shy, he was self-conscious. He'd sit down, he'd talk, I'd have to pull it out of him. He gets up and walks out. A heterosexual guy comes in, plops down, lays it all out. He gets up and walks out. Another homosexually oriented guy comes in, timid, shy. It was that posture that I was observing that I later found out is a shame posture, or an anticipatory shame posture. He feels ill at ease with males. He feels most comfortable with females. Talk about the importance of father salience. It's so important that the boy perceives the father as benevolent, good, loving. I can be safe with him. Also, that the boy perceives the father as strong. So the boy does not need a loving father who is perceived as weak or unmasculine, and perhaps beaten down by the mother, nor does he need a boy whose father is strong and masculine, but also critical and rejecting. He needs both good and strong. Someone worthy of imitation. Someone worthy that I could disidentify mother and I can lean on this guy. And none of our men, again, an absolute term, none of our men ever perceived their fathers as good and strong, as salient. Talk about the classic triadic relationship, and this is something we see over and over again. They're looking for a gay gene. They're looking for a biological foundation, and yet we see repeated studies showing the classical triadic relationship. That wasn't even started, that was before Irving Bieber. Irving Bieber in the 1960s did a study of over 1,000 homosexual men, and he found this classic triadic relationship. And in the classic triadic relationship, we have the over-involved, emotionally involved, dominant, strong personality of the mother, quiet, withdrawn, non-expressive, and or a hostile father. And we have the temperamentally shy, timid, introverted, artistic, imaginative son, boy. And if we had the time, we could talk about whether or not that really is temperament, or if it's a shut-down experience with an intrusive mother. So what we are calling temperament, I'm just letting it go at that, but there could be a good argument that the insecure attachment with the mother, the ambivalent on again, off again, narcissistic, tune into the son, tune out of the son, depending upon her narcissistic needs, can create the temperamentally shy. Because John Bowlby, who did the studies on infant attachment, described the insecure attachment boy as exactly that: shy, timid, introverted, and imaginative. When you look more closely at the classic triadic relationship, we see that between the mother and father there was a poor communication, especially during that gender identity phase. A special relationship between the mother and the son. And you'll hear our clients say, oh, I have a special understanding of my mother. We understand each other so well. We're soulmates. I could read her mind. With the father and the son, it's guarded, ill at ease, antagonistic. And that attitude of guarded, ill at ease, antagonistic is carried over into his relationships with all men. And so paradoxically, the homosexual is both sexually attracted to men, but also afraid of men. I remember Richard Cohen saying to me many years ago, I'm attracted to men I'm afraid of. And that was like, I couldn't understand that, but I checked it out with the guys I work with, and they say that repeatedly. So you can see that the homosexual desire is to conquer the feared masculine, the unavailable masculine. Now, while we put the focus on the father relationship, we have to consider for a moment the role of the mother. How is she as wife to husband? How does she represent to the boy your father? How does she relate to him? Does she relate to him with respect? Does she relate to him in a way that the boy can feel good about his father? How does she relate to the boy as a mother? Does she make him feel good about his masculinity? How does she reflect masculinity toward both the father and to the son? The physical nature of the father-son relationship, and it's so important to understand that the emotional connection between the father and son is done physically. And the study was showing, many studies show this, that when mothers have to babysit their son, their toddler son, the mothers are watching, only concerned about safety. We hope he doesn't get hurt. When a young father is asked to babysit his son, he plays with the boy. There's that animation, especially during the gender identity phase. The gender identity phase is characterized by the toddler running around. There's a physicality. And there's something about an active little boy running around that stimulates the young father. Before then, he's just a little infant, and you know how fathers are when they have to hold the infant, they feel uncomfortable, the head is flopping, and they just pass it off to the mother. But during this period of time, you know, if you want to call it evolution or God's design, just when the boy needs the father most, the animation, the physicality, the motor activity, the aggressiveness, the recklessness of the little boy stimulates the interest of the young father. And we've all seen this ritual. There's a ritual that happens. We've all seen it, but perhaps we've never understood. We'll see the young father tossing the son up in the air and catching him, tossing him up and catching him. And this is a ritual. It's a bonding ritual. And of course, the mother is watching this and she's getting a heart attack because she doesn't understand any of this, you know. But the boy is first frightened. You'll see the boy is frightened. But the father is laughing. And so the boy starts to laugh. And so a very important lesson has been learned that fathers teach sons. Danger is fun. This is a lesson we convey. Mothers do not understand this. But more importantly, another lesson is taught, which is daddy will catch you. You can trust your father. Scary, caught. Scary, caught. He's always there to catch me. I can trust men with my emotional life. That's what the therapist is. The therapist becomes the first male figure that you can trust your vulnerability with. We advise fathers, if you don't hug your sons, some other man will. We talk about a shared delight. A shared delight is an interaction, a visual interaction And then in the autobiography of Malcolm Muggeridge, he talks about how he and his father would go out to lunch, and the father would see him from across the office, and he saw his father was happy to see him. And there's this communication. My father is happy. He is delighted in seeing me. And that is transformative. All our men did not get that from their father. And homosexual activity is really a desire for that shared delight. But it's become sexualized. Father as mystery. And this is a repeated theme that we see with our clients. My father was a mystery. I never understood him. I never knew what he was feeling. He never disclosed anything, what was going on inside. See, men are mysteries. My mother, on the other hand, I could read her mind. I could manipulate her into getting whatever I wanted. I knew exactly what was going on. In fact, I was too sensitive to my mother. It's interesting that the fathers of the homosexual did not have a good relationship with his father. Not traumatic to the point of creating a homosexual condition, but he didn't have that close connection with his father. He didn't know what to do when the boy moved away from him. He didn't know that I have to grab this boy and pull him in and make that bonding happen. He just surrendered the boy. The latency period, now we're talking about 5 years old to 12 years old, and we see that kind of hostile, fearful relationship with the father gets carried over into poor peer relationships. And so much of our therapeutic hours are spent with our men reliving traumatic, rejecting experiences with their peers. We talk about the kitchen window boy, this boy who is with his mother, with his older sister, with his grandmother, and he's looking out the window. This window is a kind of symbol for the emotional detachment. And he's looking out at the boys playing, and there's that rugged physicality, whether it be baseball or soccer or just rushing around. There's that physical engagement, and he desires to be a part of that, but he feels somehow deficit. He doesn't feel like he's capable of engaging in that. And so the masculine is mysterious and exciting, and women are familiar and smothering and boring. And we see at this time cross-gender behavior, what Richard Green from UCLA called the sissy boy syndrome. Sissy boy syndrome, or gender nonconformity, which is a high prediction, as in 75%, high prediction of adult homosexuality, bisexuality, or transgenderism. During this period of time, we have the false self, the good little boy, the boy who is inhibited in his vitality. He's constricted, he's obedient, he's polite, he's clean. He goes to school in the morning in a white shirt, he comes back at 3 o'clock with a white shirt. He envies the bad boys. He envies, he gets excited, but he doesn't know how to break through that barrier to connect with them. I remember a client saying to me, he said, every morning my mother would comb my hair, make that line, and spray it with hairspray. And all day long he'd walk around, the kids would touch his hair, say, look at the kid with the plastic hair. You know, so it's that kind of rigidity. Let me spend a minute on theater and acting. This is something characteristic of the pre-homosexual boy. He's in a false self. It's an extension of that good little boy. And many studies show that the pre-homosexual boy is into theater and acting. We see pretense, pretend, make-believe, fantasy. It's a big world for the homosexual child, and we see them into theater, and that's why they take the homosexual men and gay men take such a dominant role in theater and acting. I remember the story of a boy coming home, pre-homosexual boy coming home from school one day. He was very, very excited. He says, Mom, he says, we're doing a play at school, and I'm playing the part of the father. The mother got very, very angry. She said, you go back and tell him you want a speaking part. Any fathers here? Only joking? No, I'm not. Okay, so alienation from the body. So they don't have this internalized sense of masculinity. So as they're going into adolescence, the body is developing into a masculine body, but they don't own it. It's alien to themselves. It's like a child who was never told he was intelligent and he gets an A on the test. He can't really own it. He really can't claim it for himself. And we see excessive modesty in boyhood. Oh, my father would walk around with his shirt off. My older brother would walk up. But there's this cover-up. I remember a client saying to me, he said, I remember distinctly at 7. By the way, he didn't remember it until he saw the presentation, and then he came up to me afterwards. He says, you know, I remember. I was 7 years old, and I was taking a bath, and my mother and my aunt were giving me a bath, and something happened with the water, the faucet or something, and they had to call my uncle. And when my uncle walked into the bathroom, I covered up. He said, even then, at 7 years old, I knew there was something wrong with that, but he didn't understand it. And so we see in adulthood the reaction against excessive modesty, exhibitionism, and we see exhibitionism in the homosexual. There's a sexual excitement at just being seen, because it's really an eroticization of an emotional need to be seen, to be reflected, to be acknowledged as a man by a man. That's what the motivation is, to be seen as a man by a man, but it's become eroticized. Sexual abuse, man-boy sexual contact, and homosexual outcome. Gay activists, gay apologists would say no, but the fact is that there is a high correlation. 1/3 of our homosexual clients were sexually abused by older boys or men. And in the personal histories of homosexual gay men, not just our clients, but gay men, there is same-sex abuse. And of course, we know that those who abuse become abusers, and that gay activists are more likely to lobby for the lowering age of sexual consent. Moving into adolescence, 12 years old to adulthood, we see the erotic transitional phase. The erotic transitional phase now is all this psychological stuff that we've been talking about, all this identification stuff that we've been talking, now becomes sexualized. And usually our men will report their first same-sex attraction, their clear, explicit sexual moment around 12 years old. It could be younger if there was sexual molestation from an older person. If your client is reporting sexual experiences before 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, you could be sure that there was an adult involved. Homosexual behavior as a reparative drive. Again, it's the understanding that same-sex behavior is an attempt to repair your childhood emotional hurts. And this is the good news. This is the optimism. That you're telling the client, look, you're not just some kind of weirdo, you're not some kind of pervert, a sinner. You are trying to fulfill your emotional needs. Again, the 3 A's, attention, affection, approval, but you're trying to do it on a sexual level, and it's not working. And you know it's not working, that's why you're here. A great quote from Marlon Brando, I used to be homosexual, but it didn't work. Marlon Brando. So associated features of male homosexuality is male gender deficit, as we've been talking about, problems with assertion. A lot of their authentic assertion becomes eroticized and acted out sexually. Detachment from men, the anticipation of rejection. And we need to also understand that there's a great deal of pathology associated with the homosexual condition. Again, definition of pathology is self-defeating, self-destructive, maladaptive behavior. And there are many, many studies that show this, but I'm going to give you 2 quick ones. 1991 study, Archives of General Psychiatry, substantially higher levels of mental health problems in gay-identified men, including suicide attempts, anxiety disorder, major depressions, eating disorders, substance abuse like drugs and alcohol. And this was conducted in New Zealand and the Netherlands, which is supposedly more liberal, more accepting. So how much can we attribute that to homophobia? The other study, also 1999, Archives of Sexual Behavior, survey of 2 million Danes in Denmark, which happened to be, by the way, the first country to permit gay marriages in 1989. Again, gay men came from families that were where there was more divorce. And the shorter duration of the marriage of their parents, the more likely they were to be gay identified. And we saw, again, father absence or an unknown father. Why are we talking about pathology? This is not gay bashing. This is educational, because young people are not being told this. They're not being told. And we have an obligation to educate and to inform. Failure of the male couple. Many, many studies show that, especially now with the talk of gay marriage. But again, the studies show that these relationships do not last long term. One quick study, McWhirter and Mattson, 1984, and really McWhirter and Mattson, their studies have been replicated many, many times, but I mentioned their study because they were two gay activists themselves. McWhirter was a gay psychiatrist, Mattson was a gay psychologist. They were in relationship with each other for 12 years. And they were determined to prove that gay men were capable of maintaining long-term sexual fidelity. And they found 165 of the best gay relationships. How many of those 165 of the very best gay relationships were able to maintain sexual fidelity for more than 5 years? Take a guess. Answer, 0. None of them. And so the researchers say, their advice to their gay readers is, if you want your gay relationship to last long term, more than 5 years, don't expect sexual fidelity. Andrew Sullivan, so-called gay conservative, said, at the end of his life, the gay man has two kinds of male relationships, those that he is friends with and those that he has sex with. That's separation. So we know that there's a search for maleness, promiscuity, and short-term relationships. 5 steps toward change for our clients. Number 1, to understand the origins of one's attractions, to realize that it's not just about sex. These are unmet emotional needs that are trying to be met. To keep the client to staying honest with his feelings, to get beyond the shame, and to just look at what he's doing and to understand why he's doing it. The importance of male friendships, which is a big part of reparative therapy. Taking responsibility for his behavior, not in a moralistic way, but to understand. When a client tells me he acted out, the first question I ask him is, how were you feeling about yourself just before you decided to act out? And sure enough, it'll be that what we call the gray zone. Dead, flat, lonely, hopeless, empty, hollow inside. And that becomes the focus of the therapy, not the homosexual activity. The last one is the religious dimension. While reparative therapy is a separate, empirically based treatment, certainly the client who is coming in with a religious perspective it's an important part of their healing process. It gives them the support and the encouragement and the reason to continue to work. That's my whole presentation. No time for Q&A. We're going to go for lunch. Thank you.